good morning from Washington, D.C. Welcome everyone to this wonderful discussion we're going to be having today. My name is Professor Japa Dawuni. I'm an associate professor of political science here at Howard University, and also the founding director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Global Leadership. I welcome everyone to today's occasion, which is part of our celebration for Women's History Month at Howard University. And we're going to be having a delightful conversation, a historical conversation, and one that would help all of us renew our commitment to women's issues, gender issues here at Howard and also globally. So I would like now to also quickly encourage everyone, please watch out and follow us on social media, visit our website. And during this program, we encourage you to tweet some of the wonderful sayings and statements you'll be hearing from our panelists today and engage with one another during the session. I would also like to encourage everyone to, if you are on Howard campus, to come by the Stokes Library where we are having an exhibition starting today till the 23rd, highlighting research conducted by Howard University graduate students that look at different departments and colleges at Howard and the presence of women over time. So this exhibition is open till the 23rd of March, and we encourage you to stop by. So without taking too much time, I would like to briefly tell you about the Women's Center at Howard. The center was officially launched last year, October. This was made possible by a $1 million gift that was given by Howard University trustee, Mr. Marin, and his wife, Heather Hay Marin. As the founding director for this center, I take it as a duty and an obligation, not just for me writing the grant to get the money, but that I am part of the very, very little part of the bigger history of women at Howard University. So this center comes at a great time where we are continuing the work that has been done by women in history, Howard University's history, and then we are projecting onto the future. And that is what this panel discussion is about, to pay homage to women who have built Howard University and to recognize the works of others who are currently doing that and to project into the future and hand over the work to the future generation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. I'll turn over the discussion now to my colleague, Dr. Carolette Norwood, who is a full professor of sociology and also the chair of the Department of Sociology and Criminology, who will be moderating the discussion today. Dr. Norwood, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to introduce to you all our panelists. We have Dr. Joyce Ladner, who is an American civil rights activist, an author, a civil servant, a sociologist, professor, and the former interim president at Howard University. We also have here Dr. Watkins, who is the director of Howard University's Women's Study graduate certificate program and professor of Africana Studies. I believe Dr. Bonner has not yet joined us, but Dr. Bonner, when she gets here, so you know, is the Senior Vice President for Research and Compliance at Howard University, and also a former professor of sociology. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first questions. So the first question is to all the panelists, and it's a general question, which is, I would like you to tell us a little bit about your journey here at Howard University and how you found yourself involved in women and gender studies. And either panelist can go first.
I'll start. I first came to Howard in 1971. And I left in 1973. I came back in 1981. And first I was an associate professor in the sociology and anthropology department. When I came back, I was in the School of Social Work until 1990, when I became vice president for academic affairs, which is a step down from being provost, but provost means you have the entire university budget as well. My journey in women's studies is not so much a journey as because we didn't have any organized programs at that time until Dr. Bonner received a grant from my office to start the program it's a certificate, I believe, in women's studies. My journey was in some ways enhanced by the fact that I was both VP, that is for 4 years, and then interim president for a year, and was able to influence and to promote and to lift up women throughout the lower campus into various positions. I always considered it my duty, to try to bring as much equity between the genders as possible. I was not always as successful as I may have wished. But I think my scholarly work I should have to include as well, because my first book was based on my dissertation on adolescent girls and women and the impact of race and class on their gender development. That was a study done in St. Louis, and I just mentioned before we went live that the American Sociological Association and the Association of Black Sociologists had commemorative panels at their annual meetings on the 50th anniversary since the publication of the book. I think that was perhaps my greatest achievement. I came to Howard for a book signing before I actually started working. I came in to Moreland Spring Garden for Andrew Billingsley, who was then Vice President of Academic Affairs, invited me up to take a look over the campus and to sign my book. I returned that fall as an associate professor after having left, spent the prior year and part of that year, 70 and 71, studying the roles of women in nation building in Tanzania, where I carried out a post-doctoral fellowship. Women were, well, I won't go into any great detail, but suffice it to say that women in Tanzania, which was heavily Muslim, were encouraged very strongly by the leadership, President Nyerere, to take an equal role in developing the nation. So that's the background I brought to Howard. And that's, I left Howard after the board appointed someone else to become president. And I went to the Brookings Institution. And after that, I went into retirement. But one more thing, I was on the board, I was appointed to the board of the Financial Control Board, which was President Clinton appointed a board to balance the city's budget. The city had gone broke. Bonds were at junk bond status. And I was one of the 5 people who were appointed to that board. And I had oversight for the public school system. That's about my background. I think that's enough.
Thank you. I see Dr. Bonner has joined us. I did introduce you in your absence, just so that the audience would know who you were by the time you joined us. At this point, we're just talking a little bit about our journeys at Howard University and how we found ourselves, or how you found yourself, you and Dr. Watkins, involved in women and gender studies. Dr. Watkins, would you like to jump in next, and then we can go to Dr. Bonner?
Well, I would like to defer to Dr. Bonner because of her crucial role.
Yes,
I'm the junior person here, so I
understood. Understood. All right. Well, why don't we go there? Dr. Bonner?
I believe she's muted.
There we go. First of all, let me apologize for being late. I thought I was absolutely on time. Everything was set up and, whatever can go wrong goes wrong. So I am so happy to join you guys. It just gives me a great deal of pleasure to see this center stand up. Howard needs it. My journey to Howard is very interesting. And I say a special good morning to Dr. Ladner, because I would not have been at Howard if it had not been for her. I was in New York at the Center for Women in Government as its director. I had a small grant to try and diversify that center, because when I went, there was only one undergraduate Black woman being, as she put it, terrorized. And so I wanted some diversity. I came for a visit. Dr. Ladner at that time was the provost, and I was offering grant money to engage Howard women. And she said to me, as she always is, very direct, instead of you bringing money from your center here, you should be on this campus doing what you need to do. And I said, and I must say this because sometimes we make big mistakes, right? I said in a very arrogant way, and I didn't mean it that way, but I said, you probably can't afford me. And she said, don't be too sure about that. You come, I will give support. Howard women need you. And so
I said all of that.
there were a number of openings at Howard at the time, but one of them was chair of sociology and anthropology. I threw my hat in the ring for chair, discovered that I had two brothers who was also vying for that position. And I must tell you, I did a typical woman thing. I was, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, as you probably know, but I felt so somehow guilty that I was putting my name in, and these two good friends and both males were vying for this position. But I thought about it, and I immediately got on the phone after I left DC, and I called each one of them and I said, why don't we make a pact? Whoever gets this position, the other two will help. I did that and got their confirmation that they would support me and I would support them, never looked back. And it was absolutely true. We supported each other. So I came to Howard in 1992 as chair of the department. Howard for me was like a big family with a lot of humps and bumps and, you know, families. But for the most part, it was a journey that was an absolute pleasure, no matter how hard things got. It was like working to get things accomplished, shoring up students, connecting with faculty. Faculty was the backbone, and I'm certainly in awe of what's happening right now. Backbone is the faculty and the students, and we make things happen, and that's a joy. I was at a center that was primarily engaged in changing government policy for women and training women for entry into job situations that they never, ever saw themselves in. One was training women for fireman work in New York State. My center was already engaged in some of that work, primarily in pay equity. And I might add that yesterday was Equal Pay Day, but hey, we're far from it. And if we look at the recent stats that the Labor Department has issued, we know that we're still struggling to get to equal pay for women in our society. And it's even more difficult for women of color. Anyway, I didn't come with establishing an institute necessarily in mind. We talked about how we could shore women up, help to increase their participation in research. A lot of academic things that one would do across the board in any institution. But I had a grant from the National Science Foundation to increase research on our campus. And that particular grant supported, of course, graduate students. It was my graduate students that kept talking after class. And that's the joy of being in a place where you connect with a wide variety, a diverse variety of people and young people. They are indeed our future. But the graduate students stayed after my theory class and they talked about things that were happening in their personal lives. It took me back to Dr. Ladner's Tomorrow's Tomorrow. And that research where she spent time really on the ground, as I call it, talking to people so that when she wrote it, she was able to transmit information that we wouldn't have gotten just sending out a survey. And so sitting with those students, male and female, talking about issues that happened in their personal lives, in their academic lives, in their relationships, helped me think about what our next steps would be for women on the campus. Now, I got pushback. Let me be clear. I got pushback from women. I got pushback from men. And I had to think very hard about how I would proceed. The African American Women's Institute was a deliberately chosen name, and African American women offended or jarred some people. But having come from an institute that was primarily made up of white women, except for me as the director, being challenged because one woman said to me, I feel like somebody has come into my house and now I have to ask to use the bathroom, to have your staff go to the highest level of government administration in state and say that they needed a job desperately because they could no longer, after years of being with the center, stay there, not knowing that I was doing my job and I had made the right connections. And so I would know that. I wanted it to be clear, since there were only two at the time centers headed by Black women, the center at Maryland with Dr. Bonnie Dill Thornton, the center at Spelman headed by Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftal, both of whom are friends of mine and colleagues. I wanted Howard to have a center that stood out, didn't exclude other women of color, but it meant that we were looking at our situation as well in a more in-depth, a more pronounced way. And I wanted the rest of the country and the world to know that. So, hence the name African American Women's Institute. How did we get to the certificate program? And I'll go a little faster. We got to the certificate program through that theory class where I was listening, my graduate students were engaged, other members of the department were listening. And one of the graduate students said to me, why don't we have some way to recognize students who take classes under the umbrella of the African American Women's Institute? And of course, you know, that had to be hashed a long time. We had to go through the dean of the graduate school. We needed to get the provost to sign off on it. We needed a lot of things to happen. Hats off to the women of Howard University. I had support across the campus, even though I had some pushback. I had support from all of the departments. We didn't exclude men. That was the beauty of the African American Women's Institute certificate idea. Men were included as well. And so our first issuance of certificates, two guys, I think it was, two men, were recipients. So it was a family effort. It was an institutional effort eventually. But there is a a saying, and I should have led with this, because the other reason we needed the Institute, and now we really need this center, and I hope that Dr. Duane is going to get a lot of support for that. There is a line, actually a verse, a biblical verse, and I'm not going to go all religious on you guys this morning, but it comes from Matthew, and it's chapter 7 and verse 3. And I'll paraphrase. It says, "Why look at the mote in your brother's eye when you have a beam in your eye?" We do not challenge enough in our own communities the need that women have. And so I think that having a center stand up that is community centered is absolutely perfect at this time. But I also would suggest, since Howard has had a long history of international connection, that you nurture that and join it with this global center that Dr. Duane has stood up, so that we challenge our brothers and sisters globally, but certainly locally, and certainly the microcosm that we witness on our own campus. And so with that, I'll stop.
Alrighty. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Duane and her team and everybody responsible for organizing this event. And I want to also acknowledge what a distinct privilege it is for me to be joining this conversation with two of the intellectual leaders responsible for the Women's Studies Graduate Certificate Program. It would not have existed without their efforts and without their vision and without the everything that they did to bring it about. And it has really made a difference in the lives of our graduate students and in their professional development and intellectual journeys. And so we stand on your shoulders, and we are just so happy to give you your flowers and to acknowledge you while you are here, and we can still sit at your feet and learn and grow and carry on the work that you have done. It was not in vain. It has made a difference, and we appreciate and love you, and we want to honor you everything that we do. So thank you all so much. I'm Belethea Watkins, and my journey at Howard University began in 2011. I joined the faculty of the Department of African American Studies. I'm an associate professor in Africana Studies. And my connection with the Women's Studies program began here at Howard with an invitation to deliver 2 guest lectures in the Introduction to Women's Studies course. At that time, when I came, it was team taught. And based on my interaction, and then when the leadership learned of my background, and let me give you a little bit about that. My dissertation was on Black feminist discourses. I have a PhD in Africana Studies from Temple University. And my work and research focused on Black women's intellectual thought and Black women's, the development of Black women's studies within Africana Studies, and the women's suffrage movement and the intersection of race and racism in American feminist thought. I am the founding director of the Women's Studies program at Bowie State University, which created a minor in the Department of History and Government, which is celebrating almost 20 years of existence as of last year. And in addition to my scholarship, which focuses on Black women's intellectual history and Black women's intellectual thought, the major area of research has been the development of Africana studies approaches and Africana centered approaches to the analysis of gender, race, sexuality, and class. And so in addition to that experience, I also had the opportunity to serve as the National Secretary of the Association of Black Women's History. And so of Black women's historians, I should say that properly. So I was just thrilled once I did those lectures that eventually that following year, I was giving the invitation to serve as director of the Women's Studies Graduate Certificate Program. And it has been just a wonderful experience. The very unique formation allows graduate students from across the disciplines, from history to political science, to sociology, to communications, to the Department of English, to the Department of Education, the School of Education, the School of Social Work, to come together to convene in those courses in ways that they wouldn't necessarily make that connection. Normally, you would just be in political science and you would just interact with other graduate students in political science. So it's a very enriching environment to have the conversations and the connections across the academic discipline. So in my experience, in my journey, we have been value added to many other departments. I have been asked to serve on at least 20 dissertation committees in the different disciplines. And that is rare. People normally serve on dissertation committees in their discipline and their discipline alone, but it just speaks to the breadth of interest of women across the discipline, and not just women, it's also been men, across the different academic disciplines to address and study and analyze and research women. And we've also continued that tradition of having men be involved in terms of taking courses, male students, along with women. We've also had students from different universities come, from majority universities come to the course. We've had international students in the course. So it has been a very enriching experience in that way. So serving on dissertation committees, I've been asked at representing the department to write comprehensive exam questions for other academic disciplines, for majors that are focusing on women's studies issues and interests. And we've also been asked to representing the department to do public lectures. So being connected with the community, speaking to community groups about issues. Speaking at other universities, I've been asked to speak at multiple universities about women's issues. We've also been asked to, when President Obama was in the White House, they did, part of my research interest, as I may have mentioned, was the women's suffrage movement, picking up on the tradition of Rosalind Turboyd Penn and extending her scholarship. And so I was asked to join the White House initiative on Black women suffragists in anticipation at that time of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, to make sure that Black women's stories were included in a way that did justice and not just add them on as a footnote or afterthought, or to continue the absence of Black women. So this, in addition to the intellectual journey, trying to promote academic excellence, the Women's Studies Certificate Program also promotes social responsibility, service. And so that's been my journey so far, and I will stop there.
So it sounds like there's been a lot of individual activity around Black feminists and women's studies work at Howard. And you all have worked towards institutionalizing that through the creation of the Women and Gender Certificate Program, but also most recently with this center. Dr. Ladner, considering that Howard has never had a full-time woman president, could you tell us a little bit about your time as an interim president? And this is, part of thinking about how institutionalizing equity might work. I think this question is particularly good at helping us kind of, pan out some of those issues. And would you also describe women in the academy then and now?
Describe women in what way?
In the academy, positionality. It could be, again, from research to the ways women's studies programs have gradually been institutionalized. And honestly, I'm new to Howard. The slow pace in some ways with it being institutionalized here. Clearly, there's been a lot of work, but it is, and I'm happy to see that we're moving forward with a minor and the graduate program, but, a major, in women's studies at Howard. So, I mean, women in the academy, whether it's the research or in the ways that programs are institutionalized around the study and scholarship of women.
Okay, I'll ask Florence for help on the latter part of your question. But if you look at Ukraine now and what's happening there, I took over as president of Howard during Howard's Ukraine crisis in a way. It was very, very turbulent.
Yes.
I was the second person in the hierarchy of officers of the university. Franklin Jennifer, the president who hired me as his chief academic officer, left under a cloud, and I should say many years later. And the board selected me to take over. It was a very, 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 very difficult year. The first thing that happened is that I uncovered shortfall of about $26 million and change. No one, especially, I won't say no one, but none of the faculty senate believed that I didn't know that this was the case before I took over. But the fact is, I mean, swear on my grandson's birth that that was the case. Franklin Jennifer never allowed all of his officers to see the entire university budget. The only budget we saw was our own. I didn't understand it in the beginning and often asked why couldn't we see the budget? But I came to understand that there was a lot of control going on with that he and the chief fiscal officer, who really wanted to run my division as well as all the others, a guy named Fletcher, he and Jennifer were the two people who always convened on the budget. I used to literally walk down to Fletcher's office to tell him that I am not giving up. And I told Jennifer the same. I always wanted a 5% across the board cut. And I told him I'm not going to cut faculty. I'm not going to, most of the salaries, most of the budget is in salaries anyway. My budget was for sure. And I just refused, to continue to cut. And I always argued that the chief mission of the university is to educate its students. Without faculty, we cannot carry out that mission. And it's not, to cut 10% or 5% of the academic budget is not the same as cutting the budget of the VP for administration or external relations or whatever, but it was an uphill fight all the way. But I always kept them at bay. I mean, I staved them off as much as possible. But what I didn't know was that, you see, the way you keep pumping the lifeblood into a university is to raise funds. If you're president. So very little money was raised. And therefore, it was a matter of cutting from that which was there. Anyway, by the time I became interim president, we had this budget shortfall. So I had the choice, it was my choice to either sit there and watch it, the university erode further, and not deliver basic services or to do something about it. So what I did was, in order to try to get the university back on its stable footing, we did several things. One is that we froze all spending, all faculty travel, hiring, except in tremendous cases of need. I held all academic programs and all student services. That's the word I just forgot. I held them harmless. They were not to be touched. And we had a university-wide committee that examined the different proposals that we generated. And in the end, we hired consultants. And the end result was that we were always top heavy in staff. So we cut 400 staff positions on one day. And I don't know, I may still be in court over those, but it was not easy. It was the most painful thing I've ever done. It was, and no one, of course, none of the staff who were cut would believe that either. But I always argued that, and I met campus-wide with several times. And I stated that the very existence of the university as we know it is at stake. And had we had further erosion during that year, God only knows what will have happened. But we ended the academic year, or the fiscal year, I should say, with a cash reserve. We forgot how much, I think it was about 25 million, maybe. And the Board of Trustees let me go. Or I shouldn't say let me go, but they didn't see fit to appoint me permanent president, even though I had far more than demonstrated my ability to lead the university. Because through the hard times, we kept our standing as a research library. And I don't know, are we still a research library? Do we still have research library status? I don't know. I know for a time we didn't. And I think that I left the university with a foundation on which to build. I don't regret anything that happened. I regret that, except that I regret that we had to let so many people go. But if it was a matter of saving the university as we knew it or not, there's a lot of pain and a lot of shared pain. Now, and always, because I'm an academic, always my chief mission has been to preserve the integrity of the academic programs, to increase that value to whatever extent possible. So there were times I would rob Peter to pay Paul. I didn't have the money to give Dr. Bonifer her center, but I found it, from somebody else's budget. And it was well spent, money well spent, right, Florence?
Yes.
Okay, well, overall, I would say that the 5 years I was in the administration were good years. Nothing brought me greater joy than to see that the academic programs won awards or professors gained renown in some area, that our students' job placement attested to the fact that they had gotten a first-rate education, and so on and so on. And the dissertations produced, I used to sit in once in a while on dissertation hearings just to keep my feet wet, in the academy. But I think that overall, I look back on those years as having been some of the best of my life, personally and professionally. Now, on the status of women's studies program, I can speak to. I think that women's studies faced a similar problem as did Black studies, and that is that of trying to find legitimacy. When Black studies first began, and I should say that I was at the Institute of the Black World in Atlanta, when we held the first Black Studies conference. We developed some of the earliest curricula, and that was in 1969 or something. But what happened is that Black studies, was often described by those who do not find any value in Black life and culture and history, was described as an irrelevant that subject, that it did not have enough foundation, strong enough foundation on which to build. Why not keep Black studies within the departments of history, for example, or economics? When you talk about Black economics, are you talking about U.S. governmental? Are you talking about economics for the nation? Or are you just trying to pull out a specific group and describe? Well, I don't have to go over these, but we saw the same thing in women's studies, that women's studies were, again, why can't you just teach the sociology of the family instead of teaching the sociology of women, or of African-American women, history of whatever. And I think that as time passes and has passed, we've seen just the enormous spread or the proliferation of very strong African-American studies and women's studies programs. I think that women's studies at Howard faced a more difficult time because of chauvinism. Men wondered, it's like a man asking his wife, why do you need more money? You have enough clothes, you have enough food to eat, or why do you need this? Why do you, and the same thing with women's studies. Why can't you be subsumed under this larger umbrella? Why do you have to have some separate or separatist, as one guy told me on campus, area of study? I think that's what women's studies programs faced. And it's very, very painful to me today to see that I left the university in 95, that 05, 15, 27 years later, we still don't have an undergraduate or graduate minor, not to mention a major. We should have had a major in Black women's studies at the undergraduate level, at least a long time ago. Anyway, I'll turn it over now to Florence Bonner.
Well, hopefully that will be coming sooner than later.
Okay.
We're going to get there. We will get there.
Yeah.
Yes. So Dr. Watkins, you did speak a little bit about the graduate program, certificate program. So it's, can you give us some sense of what's happening with regards to research that's being conducted now, research and work that's being conducted now through the graduate certificate program?
Yeah, so, the Women's Studies Certificate Program serves a very vital role in the academy, not just at Howard University, but within the larger field of women's studies. And talking about picking up on what Dr. Ladner just talked about, the debates that are shared between Black studies and women's studies, and really are debates over, looking at women's studies or Black studies as subject matter versus looking at them from a disciplinary lens, which deals with not just the what you study or the who, but the how you study, methodology, epistemology, those kind of questions in terms of the types of ways you analyze issues, and disrupting this kind of dominant narrative. So we play a vital role in providing leadership on these issues, bringing our distinct cultural and social perspectives to these issues. We understand when we look at feminism that the centering of whiteness and people are having conversation about decolonizing feminism, decolonizing women's studies. But what is important about where we stand is that it is a program that gives graduate students who deserve an opportunity to do graduate research and graduate work within women's studies, and a specialization of Black women's studies, which, as Dr. Bonner notes, can be controversial to some people, which should not be at a school with our profile, but also focusing on Black women's studies does not mean you exclude other women of other cultural backgrounds. So we've had students from other different backgrounds who are able to use the methodologies and ideals and the question. As a matter of fact, like Black studies, that has served as a precedent, has served as a paradigm for people to then re-examine their own cultural spaces and places. And so what is unique about this is that Clark Atlanta University, for example, is the only degree granting doctoral status HBCU granting graduate degrees in Africana women's studies. And so with Clark Atlanta University's program started in 1982 by Dr. Shelby Lewis, who's done important scholarship. We joined them in at least providing the foundational graduate space for students to do research. We're very inclusive, addressing some of the questions that Pat Hill Collins raised, and that is this ideal of this kind of debate about womanism versus feminism, and recognizing, again, not just inclusive in terms of people's cultural background, but we highlight the opportunity for students to engage these questions, these research questions and projects from a range of theories and perspectives within women's studies. So people are able to look at issues from a womanist perspective, or Africana womanist perspective, or a non-aligned perspective, or a Black feminist intersectional perspective. So we try to recognize that no one intellectual theory has a monopoly on truth, and that we should be in conversation, and the way a discipline becomes stronger is that they're able to engage in multiple spaces and conversation. In terms of research, we've had students do research in a range of topics. One, for example, Black women's leadership roles. So we've had a student do a dissertation on Black women school principals and the staff cultures that they lead. We've had them do research on Black women's organization. I had a student do research on the National Association of University Women, which is the organization started by one of the legends of Howard University, Lucy Diggs Slough, when it was the National Association of College Women. But this student looked at the women's advocacy and civil rights work in the press, how it's represented in the press, how that organization used the press to advocate for issues of equity and social justice. We've had students study the political writings of incarcerated women in California. We've had students look at women in the church. So we've had them do research on intimate partner violence and the Black faith community and its role in addressing intimate partner violence. We've had students talk about the importance of representation, Black women and women of color representation on screen and behind the scenes. And so this student did her work on a case study on Oprah Winfrey's network, Queen Sugar series, where she examined the importance of women in terms of their representation behind the scenes as show creators, as owners of the network, as producers, as writers, and then how they represented women on screen. As a matter of fact, the student, Ollie Jefferson, who did that dissertation, as soon as she completed it, it was tweeted out. And you know, Ava DuVernay was the creator of that show. And she immediately contacted the student, wanted to read the dissertation, and the student was able to share that with her. In addition to that, we've had students go on to get several postdoctoral fellowships. Those two students, one, the one that did that Ava DuVernay contacted, she got a postdoc with the University of Maryland to work on turning her dissertation into a book. The other student who did her work on incarcerated women received a postdoc for the American Association of University Women. So they're doing rich work. And I will end up talking about the male students also benefiting. Just this year, we had Melvin Williams, a graduate of our program, received tenure in 3.5 years from Pace University in the Communications Studies Department. He's the first Black person, the first openly LGBT plus person to receive tenure in that department. And I know I said finally, this is my last point. We've also seen a difference that this opportunity provides for our students, because we lead with the point building on what others have done, and that is this ideal that they're going to take a leadership role in women's studies. They're not just going to be passive in this field, but that they should have a leadership role or aspire to have leadership roles in the national conversations around the intersection of race, class, and gender. And so I have seen from feedback from the students that having a certificate has made a difference in a competitive job market. That when they come with a PhD in sociology, I had a student who graduated with a PhD in sociology, but when she went out for a job position, she was one of the first in her class to get a job. And the fact when they saw that certificate, they were like, yes, we've been interested. It was a small school in Texas. We're interested in having women's studies courses. We are interested in creating a women's studies program here for our students. So the fact that she had this experience and this background gave her a competitive edge. So the professional enhancement and development is invaluable for our students.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to probably our final question before we start our Q&A, but I'll start with Dr. Bonner and asking, what do you see? I mean, you created the Women's Studies Graduate Certificate. What do you see as the future or in the future for women and gender studies at Howard University? And how does the past and present work being done build a foundation for the future of the field?
Well, let me begin with the question about then and now. Mm-hmm. What was it like in the women's community? We built our first big event leading to AAWI on the MIT women work that they had done on Black women in the academy, which is why we called our major event prior to establishing that certificate program, Black Women in the Academy 2. MIT women wrote a treatise on how much discrimination was happening for women in general on their campus. And Evelyn Hammonds, Dr. Hammonds was the Black woman helping to lead that struggle. She noted also the difference for Black women. So at the time that Dr. Ladner was referring to the question you posed to her, there was turmoil for women all over the country. Ford Foundation put a lot of money into established centers so that they would be shored up. We, of course, didn't have our program yet, but they put tons of money into centers across the country so that they could do the work that we're discussing now, the development of theories, the research, the methodology. Ford gave me a ton of money to launch Black Women in the Academy 2, which led to then, what do we do after having all of these women come together and internationally, by the way, come together to discuss issues on their respective campuses and what the future would look like for them. But then we pooled that information. We had conversation for months across the country about what had happened with Black women in the Academy 1, Black women in the Academy 2, and how would women do with that? And of course, out of that came discussions for the lead in to African American Women's Institute. For the future, I think that building on what we have now, but also looking at what we created in terms of a national network of women, not just Black women. I mean, of course I have to. My heart says I have to deal with what's happening in our communities because we are still in what could be called a quadruple whammy. We got to deal with gender. We got to deal with race. We got to deal with family. We got to deal with sexism. We have a whole range of things, but the arena is rich with things that this center can do and should do. I think that Dr. Watson's discussion about the research, you're already on the road for that, but foundations, networks of funders should be contacted immediately. Let them know what the past was, what you're building on. Engage the students because they bring such rich information. We need to build on Pat Hill Collins's work. Our systems are dynamic, they're not stagnant. So having graduate students use those methodologies and also the concepts, but expanding or refreshing. There's so much happening with COVID having displaced women and children. How rich is that for research? The political scene right now with the division in our government and policies that will make a difference decades from now should be explored. The behavioral sciences have been so silent in this turbulent period. I cringe. Talking heads or bastardizing, as I call it, our methodologies, our theories, and talking about issues that we should be the lead on. I challenge this center and its staff and its students to go there. I'm still connected. And let me just quickly say, not just as a listener, but I participated with the Aspen Institute, the National Academy of Science, the National Science Foundation as a program officer, as a panel person, as a reader, AAA as I led the first inaugural big data conference for AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of the Sciences, National Cancer Institute. So, and all of those were while I was on Howard's campus. So you have lots of groundwork already laid there. I would use it. I would use it.
So, Howard has a super rich legacy of Black feminist scholarship. I mean, dating back to Zora Neale Hurston or Pauli Murray or Lucy Diggs Slowe, someone mentioned. Michelle Wallace, I remember reading, I don't think she finished her studies here at Howard, but she talks about it in her iconic book. Toni Morrison.
Terrible book.
Okay.
I will not allow it to pass without my saying that.
Okay. Toni Morrison. I just learned about Loretta Ross graduating from Howard. I didn't know that until I read the 1619 piece by Dorothy Roberts. So again, I mean, what do you think is the future? Dr. Ladner, I think you made a comment about Michelle Wallace. I don't know if that was a joke or.
No, it's not a joke because she wrote,
okay.
The premise of her book, one to which I refer, was the first one she wrote. I don't know if she wrote others subsequently. Was that, oops. Can you hear me, see me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I've lost my place here. Let me see. Okay, I'm back here. No, her thesis was that the women's movement arose in direct response to the oppression of women in the civil rights movement, in particular the women in SNCC. And it was just a bunch of bull, I was in SNCC. I know all the women who were in SNCC, and we were not oppressed. If anything, we oppressed the guys, you know. You had some, that's the place I first learned or experienced, I should say, equality between the genders. And so I just think.
But is there a conversation to be had about Black patriarchy in civil rights organizations, or even?
Well, if you're talking about the SCLC back then, you know.
Right. Or,
no, I'm talking about the women. She wrote about women in SNCC, and she based it on the position paper that was written by two of the women, white women, both of whom were my friends, in SNCC. And they've subsequently said they didn't intend it as it was written and so on. But it was just not true. It was just based on untruth, period.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not talking about the NAACP and its long history of male-dominated leadership.
Yeah.
Certainly not of the preacher-led SCLC that was very, very much, I gave Ella Baker a hard time. Ms. Baker, you know, had she not had the support of Martin Luther King, who hired her for that position, she would have quit before then. I knew Ms. Baker very, very well. We talked about it, you know. Mm-hmm. So, but Michelle Wallace was not talking about those people. She referred to SNCC. Mm-hmm. If not by name, certainly by a strong inference.
Mm-hmm. And
Did I
so,
answer your question?
Yeah, well, yes, in part. I learned something I didn't know.
Okay, what's the other part of it?
On the spot, and I'm always open to learning and hearing different perspectives. So it makes me want to go back and reread Wallace's work. And I will.
Yeah, please do.
But in terms of, where we're moving with women and gender studies at Howard University, based on this rich foundation of scholars and feminist activism and feminist scholarship coming right here out of, from here, from Howard. I mean, where do we see the future of women's studies? And how might this new center play a role? The new Center for Women, Gender, and Global Leadership.
What, you want me to weigh in?
Anyone.
Oh. Oh, well.
I was asking Dr. Ladner, but yes.
Oh, were you asking me?
Dr. Ladner. Okay.
Oh, I'm removed from the campus, and I haven't been worked on a campus
right
on 20 years. So, whatever. I just think there's a pressing need, mm-hmm. And I think that we're behind time. Yeah. Should have been done a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And I would press forward. Mm-hmm. As for radical Black feminism, I don't know that the campus really, I won't say the campus, I think you'll still find a lot of pushback using radical Black feminism, but I think that you'll have some explaining to do, but I think you have to press forward.
How can
you do more
feminism?
At the undergraduate level? I'm not sure what's being done at the undergraduate level. Let me see. Are there many courses on Black women in the undergraduate curriculum?
I don't know. I'm developing a course on Black feminist social thought. I'm going to be looking to see whether the courses exist, but that begs the question: how can you do feminism that's not radical, especially Black feminism?
Well, I would like to weigh in on the fact that, again, it's important. Like my work specializes on Black women's studies within Africana studies, and to recognize the full spectrum of thought among Black women. And so, you could do feminism, but we should not make feminism compulsory. That there are women who have a contribution to make that don't do it in the name of feminism, particularly in light of the history, the contentious history between Black women and feminism, even if you reframe it as intersectional feminism. So that is not to say we discard feminism or don't recognize its role within women's studies, but it is to say that we should bring to the table this full range. And I think we will become stronger if we look at womanism and non-aligned, even those without label. So if you take, for example, you know, what was done in the past. What was done in the past is that we had advocacy for gender equity and advocacy for Black women, even long before the creation of the certificate program. And it's just that Black women's approach has been, you know, has to be grounded in our own cultural orientation and worldview. And that's real. And that means we're not just adding Black people to pre-existing narratives, that we have to fundamentally reconceptualize what it is, our particular context. What does, when we say intersectionality and we look at race and gender, how does our narrative, our concept of gender is distinct, our concept, our tradition of womanhood. So there are many other traditions of womanhood versus the dominant narrative. So for example, I'll give you the example with Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, when she brought Black women together at age 95, calling for the creation of a national organization, which led to the following year, the creation of the National Association of Colored Women. She was clear to say, our women's movement is different from the other women's movement. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
And in that sense, she said, we're not alienating or withdrawing. We're just coming to the lead, willing to join together with all others who are willing to do the work. And she was making a point that, yeah, there's another women's movement going on, but it's not it doesn't have the same mission and purpose as what Black women are doing. And so we have to honor that tradition. So when you look at people like Merce Tate or Pauli Murray, or the work that Dr. Ladner did, or Dr. Bonner, we understand that rather than purging men from our movement, that those who want to be a part of the coalition of women willing and on the right side of history are stakeholders in this knowledge. If you have a mother, a grandmother, a sister, an aunt, you are a stakeholder. So reframing that from our perspective becomes important. But in terms of the center, I think capacity building is an important opportunity. We do need a master's degree program. We have, one of the challenges for our students is the financial aid piece of this certificate program. Our certificate program is ineligible for financial aid assistance, and that limits our, yes, I find that totally surprising. The students who are pursuing master's and PhD program, they're eligible. But if you wanted to just pursue solely the women's certificate program, you cannot get financial aid. So
how many credits do you need for the certificate?
15 now. It used to be 18, but to be in alignment with the other, like the other certificate program, it's become 15. Right. But it's the federal government. But if they pursue a master's degree, so the master's degree would not displace the certificate. Let me be clear about that. The master's degree will give people an opportunity to be eligible for financial aid to pursue this. But the certificate is still very important for people. Say, for example, you want a law degree or you want a history degree, but you still want the specialization, the professional credential, the expertise, the content mastery in women's studies. This allows you to do both. So there's room for both. The other major vision, people probably get tired of hearing me saying this because I've said this at a number of meetings where we've been asked about the collaboration or the vision for the center. I would love to see a series of fellowships named after significant women in our history, particularly Howard history, but history in general. And to do it on not just stars, but we could, if we picked an academic intellectual, we could pick up the Merce Tate Fellowship. If we were to pick an administrator, we could do the Lucy Diggs Slow Fellowship. If we were to pick outstanding alumnus, we could pick Pauli Murray. If we were gonna do, and then a staff person, I would like a fellowship named after staff person. You know who I would nominate? Miss Betty Goodwin, who's been here since 1974, who is just come to a PhD graduate school ceremony. And when they acknowledge Betty Goodwin, the students erupt. People who have come through with a graduate degree
They
I've
do.
seen
They
that.
understand how important she is. So we have a step person. We have so many great women that I would say, even if we do these fellowships named after these specific women, we can actually rotate the alumni person who's honored in terms of a name, because we have so many who contribute, and we have so
Dr.
many
Watson,
people who can do that.
may I interrupt you for just a
Yeah,
second?
sure. Go ahead.
And then you can go right back to this. It seems to me that we're talking about at least 3 different things.
Right.
One on several on the academic side to get this minor going and a graduate program, and on the other side, the contribution and the support that the center can give, will give, with support from agencies that can give money, that can be designated, so on. So the first thing, and I'm going to suggest, you probably are already thinking about this, is grabbing those faculty members who are supporting that certificate program and making the trek to the dean. Since this is in the graduate school, make that trek to the dean with that coalition of faculty folks so that you can get the thing started for the minor or whatever else you want to do, and engage students to help with the change or addition of courses if you need them. Have somebody lay out the research program, for God's sake. We have so much going on right now, and we've talked about some of it, but have somebody, the second thing is to have somebody lay out the research program or help you do that, so that you have a long-term research agenda for that program. And I'm willing to bet, I don't have any money, but I'm willing to bet that you get what you want. On the center side, lots of people can help raise money for the center, and then you can designate those fellowships in the center, and nobody can keep you from giving them to folk who want to do their work in women's studies or the certificate program in particular. I think what we're doing right now is an absolute positive for the center.
Right.
You can also do training. The center can be the training ground for a lot of things that women, separate and apart from the academic issues. I think I heard this center is going to be connected to the community. So yes, you can, policy.
Right.
Yeah, policy, training, fundraising, that kind of support. And going forward then seems to me, I won't say easy, but it will be organized and you can move quickly and efficiently.
Right. And I agree.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'll go back to what you were saying.
Oh yes, and I will end, and definitely we would definitely have one of the inaugural fellowships named after Dr. Joyce Ladner. That should be a given.
Amen to that.
Save it and give it to someone else.
Amen to that.
But
Give it to
you know,
someone
there
else.
is already Dr. Dewini headed up the effort to get a women's studies minor, women, gender, and sexuality studies minor within the interdisciplinary studies field. So that is up and running. And so, you know, when you say training, Dr. Bonner, I definitely, because one of the components, the core components within the certificate program, as you know, is the internship. And so I certainly see with the visibility of the center, a greater opportunity for internships for the graduate certificate students. So I will stop there. Training, professional development would be important.
I'd just like to add one thing. Been around the city 50 years or so, off and on. And one of the things that occurs to me is that we can enhance the relationship the university has with the city government by applying for grants from the mayor's office or one of the agencies to do training. I think it would be a great step forward because they do have money and they do need training. And that opens up just a broad array of different programs.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have to recognize what our own capacity is first,
Yeah.
for training. What can we train people in?
Mhm.
But Florence spoke earlier, Dr. Bonner spoke earlier about having done training, in Albany, New York, where the seat of New York State government is. We could do no less here in the city.
Yeah, I
So
think, oh,
that raises a question and from the chat, which is, and others are encouraged to raise questions at this point for a little Q&A and the little bit of time that remains. What does research funds look like for the Women's Center? Do we know that?
I don't know.
Dr. Dewani, you still here?
I think she's Dr. Wana.
well, if I can weigh in on the okay, she's come back, yeah.
She's back now.
Let me unmute. And this is going to be strange. Okay, so I'm going to do this. It's strange because I'm class with my students and I'm trying to remove my background.
Oh,
So yeah, my students, and they're watching on the screen. So it's kind of odd having to turn off one microphone and the other. So students,
they're waving at us.
panelists, thank you
Waving
all.
back.
And so let me attempt to answer that question again. Sorry, Dr. Norwood, what was the question?
It was about research funds for the center.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Research funds?
Okay, all right. So let's see, that question from Dr. Marie. Hold on, I'm looking at the questions now. Please read the question for me again, Dr. Norwood.
What would research funds look like for the women's studies in the center?
Okay, thank you. So as has been mentioned by our panelists, I'm doing a lot of the fundraising now, working with the development office. I have an Excel sheet, I call it my wish list. And on that wish list are all that has been graciously talked about, looking for money for named fellowships, named lecture positions, a global scholar position, and of course, money for graduate students and undergraduate students. So the floor is open for anyone, or should I say our bank account is open for anyone who is listening in. For faculty at Howard, I need your support to help us raise the money to write the grants. And for those listening from the NSF foundations, we have a lot we want to do. So support us with money and we can support our students here in various ways.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have about 7 minutes left. I would like to ask each panelist for any closing remarks or reflections on today's conversation.
I just wanted to make one point. And that is, I think that going back to the different models of female empowerment, I am a womanist in the Alice Walker tradition. I'm a feminist, if you want it, whatever. You know, we call women by different names, but I don't think it should be, I think it should be inclusive. We need to reach out more, include more, instead of being deductive. And I think that we stand on the precipice of developing something really, really critical in this center. We have a cadre of excellent faculty, women as well as men, on whom we can call to help in this endeavor. I think it's critical that the center has focused one of its areas of interest on public policy. We are here in the nation's capital that other universities would die to be here, you know. And it provides great opportunities for us to get students on the Capitol Hill, to get our graduate students on the staffs of critical, important committees. I'm thinking of foreign relations right now, since Ukraine and Russia are in the news. And there was a joint session of Congress today that some of you may have seen, where the president Zelensky of Ukraine addressed both chambers of Congress. I mean, that rarely, if ever, occurs. But we need to have our young people there in those places. And I would hope that the Women's Center will continue to reach out in that direction. And any assistance I can help, I would certainly be willing to do so.
Well, I think that Dr. Dewani mentioned the National Science Foundation, but I think any number of government agencies have budgets to support different efforts. Each one of the agencies that I mentioned them because they were the first to do long-term examination of women and their issues regarding entrance into science professions, into policy, into government positions. Part of what I did in Albany was to help train women to assume office. I did the same thing once I came to Howard through a friend of mine connected with the government and President Obama's initiative to reach out globally to women. So there's money across the board, and people who know me from Howard know that my motto used to be, there's money out there and somebody's getting it, it might as well be us. But you can't get it just thinking about it, you have to go after it. And Dr. Ladner is right, students should be visible. Mentorship should be high on the list of this center, which allows you then to accompany the students, get travel grants so that they can do things. All of those are academically based. We don't want to separate them as they're some kind of appendages.
Sure.
That helps you get money. Sending them to meetings, being able to allow your students to travel says that you are preparing a generation of young people to assume positions and to bring fresh ideas to the table. So I would strongly suggest that a list of agencies that can immediately help fund the policy side of the center. National Science Foundation has money specifically for graduate and undergraduate education. Those should be presented. NSF was one of the first to give me money for women's research. So that program still goes on. Once you have a relationship, that relationship lasts. And another wonderful motto, embrace it, please. If I look good, you look good. And if you look good, I look good. Means you have a team and you have a partner or you have a mentor and you're working together. If you do good work and the foundation looks good because of your work, they're going to continue to give you money. That is true of any one of the funders. So that I look good, you look good has a broader meaning than the personal kind of thing. And as Dr. Ladner has said, I offer my service too. I guess I should say this because I'm having a little bit of speaking trouble. I had a series of medical issues one year after the other. Made me stronger because I knew I could get better, but from stroke to fever of unidentified origin to breast cancer.
Oh my God.
And all along the way, I had support from my sisters across the country. Together, we are absolutely strong. Dorothy Irene Height used to say, she had a famous statement, right? She said, you can press something with your thumb and it'll move it some. You can press with another finger in that thumb. And she finally she said, but if you press with the hand, you can move it. So together, we can in fact make a difference and we should be in the mix. We should be visible. The center is a very important piece for Howard. I'm just so happy to see it go forward. I will do whatever I can to help. And I think that amount of energy and help is not small. So call on me at any time. And all I can say right now is congratulations to all of you. I am so proud to have been a part of it. And I thank you, Dr. Ladner, for launching this, because as I said at the beginning, I would not have come to Howard had it not been for you. And I appreciate every year that I had there, except maybe the last. So, but yes.
Well, you made a great addition to the university community and made great contributions. We thank you for that.
It was a journey that was very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Watkins, do you want to have a final word here?
Again, I want to reiterate what a tremendous honor to be on this panel. You know, a lot of people don't get the opportunity to interact with the people whose shoulders they stand on. And so again, I'm so proud to have this opportunity and humbled by it. We had the opportunity, the Women's Studies Certificate Program, to have Dr. Joyce Ladner as our keynote speaker during the 150th anniversary celebration of Howard's founding. But more specifically, our program was entitled Daughters of Howard, celebrating the women scholars, their service and their intellectual contribution. So I think it's very important that the center continues to expand and build upon, but make sure that the students know the legacy of those women who came before in their roles as scholars and their contribution intellectually to the life of the university, but to the national conversation. In their role as faculty members, in their role as staff members, in their role as activists and alumni. There is such a rich legacy that we have inherited. With regards to training, the Women's Studies program in conjunction with the Alumni Association, in partnership with organizations like the American Association of University Women, we're engaged in an initiative to do training in terms of students, but not just students, faculty and staff on salary negotiation. And that is something, a program I think Dr. Dewani has picked up. The center will continue that initiative that began a few years ago. Salary negotiation is an important skill for students and future professionals to learn. But overall, I am excited about the collaboration, the community, the conversations, and I look forward, I extend my hand of friendship and fellowship to all who are interested, and I am happy to be a part of a community of strong, powerful women who are taking the baton and carrying on their leg of the race of our tradition, honoring our ancestors, honoring our elders, and honoring those who will come after us.
Thank you. Thank you all. As a newbie to Howard University, I've only been here for one semester. It's a pleasure to have been on this panel as a moderator with you. And I look forward to just, moving the needle forward towards building women and gender studies here at Howard. I wanted to mention a couple of things before we all go. I want everyone to remember to, if they have time, to visit the live exhibition at Stokes Library, which will be on exhibit until March 23rd. I also wanted to mention—
What is the exhibit about?
Dr. Dewani would know more. She mentioned it at the beginning and asked me to say a reminder, but Dr. Dewani, are you still here? I don't want to mess up. I have an idea, but
Yeah, I'm still here. Give us 1 minute to switch microphones. So the exhibit is research that was conducted by graduate students at Howard University. And we looked at the different departments and some colleges documenting the history of women at Howard. And so these are up there on the ground floor of the Stokes Health Sciences Library. It opens today. It's open. Anyone can stop by anytime. And the great thing is that these collections are going to be the first publication out of the center, done in conjunction with graduate students, and we're hoping that it will be in a special journal or an edited book. So we still have some colleges and departments to cover. So any graduate student interested in writing one of those reports, reach out to me via email, and we'll add you to cover some of these. So please join us, and we'll send pictures on our social media handles as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just plug a book. A friend of mine who was on the chat or in the talk today, Tamara Boboufla Faton, she wrote a book called Behind the Mask of the Strong Black Woman a few years ago. Just published a book called To Live More Abundantly, Black Collegiate Women, Howard University, and the Audacity of Dean Lucy Diggs Slowe. That might be something we might all want to pick up. It was just published this year. And finally, I'll mention, because a few of you raised Collins's name, and you know, and in terms of how we name our feminism or our womanism, a good read for our students, a publication that was done in 1996 in the Black Scholar by Collins, What's in a Name? Womanism, Black Feminism, and Beyond. Excellent read. Thank you all. It was a pleasure meeting you and being on this panel today.
We will get together.
Thank you. Goodbye.